Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Stellium Astrology podcast. I'm Stephanie James, your host, and today I have a very special guest with me. His name is Richard Swatton. He is a psychotherapist and an astrologer, not to mention had a previous life as a musician, which continually reemerges. And Richard is a really, really fascinating and interesting person to talk to. The reason why I got him on the show in this instance was to unpick. I just wanted to pick his brains basically, but it was to unpick sort of what's really happening when we are in the process of astrologizing, something that is perhaps not on the forefront of everybody's mind, but after a while practicing, you start to wonder, what exactly is it that we are doing? What are we accessing? How is it working? So I hope you really enjoy this show as much as I enjoyed recording it. I love talking to Richard. I've also recorded some other things with Richard. The Astrology Squad, which he does with Frank Clifford, is another YouTube channel where you can watch Richard and Frank looking at charts of celebrities and discussing certain natal placements. And I was fortunate enough to go on and talk about Michael Jackson and Madonna, and hopefully more in the future. But for now, let's talk about divination, prophecy, prediction, and prognostication with Richard Swatton. Okay, so are you still doing psychotherapy work separate to astrology?
Well, that's an interesting question for a start. I was a musician for many years.
Yes.
I've been playing the piano since age of 8.
Yes.
When my mother got one when I was at age of 8, and I didn't realize she could play, so she started to play, and then I played, and then I went all the way into college, and built up my grade exercises, and then went to music college in 1979 in Leeds, and there I wanted to become a jazz pianist. But I'd already been studying astrology since about 77, 78. Because I'd met a theosophist. Now, I don't know whether you know what theosophy is, but it was a kind of new wave movement around about the turn of the century. Madame Blavatsky created the Theosophical Society about 1875, something like that.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, the year of Jung's, wasn't it Jung? I think he was born in 1875.
Oh,
anyway,
gosh, I don't know.
Yeah, so I met a theosophist when I was actually doing a show in Bristol, actually, which is where I now live. And we got chatting, and he was an astrologer, and he introduced me to astrology, and he used to send me a book every 2 weeks. And then I would send them back, and because he lived in Wales and I lived in Portsmouth at that time. And so I learned a lot. He had all the books, Margaret Home, Vivian Robson, Alan Leo, all of these kind of, early 20th century astrologers. Anyway, so I was in Leeds, and I did my music all the way up to 2002. But in 1988, 85 to 88 was where I went to Liz Green's Centre for Psychological Astrology. And Liz Green was a Jungian analyst then and an astrologer, and she'd already brought out 2 books. One was Relating, and one was Saturn, and You Look at an Old Devil. And that's a fantastic title, and it's still, yes, it's still pertinent, relevant, and excellent then. Excellent writing, and very insightful. So around about 79, I was changing over from theosophical and occult studies in astrology and in my personal life in the Western mystery tradition, which is where all the stuff with symbols and working with the mind comes from, and or the various elements of dream working, waking up in dreams, lucid dreaming, astral projections, focus, concentration on symbols, all of that. And this seemed to go in alignment with my astrology, but at the same time I had a parallel career in music. So 2002, I retrained as a psychotherapist in 94, and by 2002 I gave up professional playing altogether. So there's a brief potted history.
Yes. Well, I think that's a great place to start. And essentially, what you do is you have a very psychotherapeutic approach to your astrological
Yeah.
study and practice, don't you? So never ever do I find a boring moment sitting in a class of yours, a lecture, or just a conversation. In fact, the things that you say inspire so much thought in my mind. I find it very easy to just, we could just talk for a very long time, couldn't we? So we're going to do our best to not go crazy today, and cover some interesting subjects that we've already
Yeah.
decided will be of interest to
Sure.
listeners and viewers. Just prior to jumping into that, you wrote a book, didn't you?
From symbol to substance.
That's it.
Yeah.
There you
And
go.
thank you for reminding me, Steph. Just to finish off that other thing. So I've been a practicing psychotherapist since 1994. And somewhere around about maybe 2010, I started to get many more people that wanted to do a combination of psychotherapy and astrology. So I keep my psychotherapy practice separate, but at the same time, there were many astrologers that wanted to do some intense work on their charts, particularly when transits come around. I mean, I spent like 2 or 3 years with one woman who had a slow Pluto transit of her sun and all when it was all in Libra, and we did about 4 years on it.
Gosh.
And you can start astrology with that, you see, and then you can go into the symbolic meanings, and then something happens or develops, and you always go back to the astrology to see that it's a time of not just change but transformation. But you can only do that with depth, with a long time, with not just study and reading. That's part of it, but seeing the actualization of a transit in your chart, in your life, and to really get to grips with it. And many more people have taken up that with me, and I find it fascinating work. And I think that is the real psychological astrology, that you use it for psychological change and development. And I've always done that myself. And, I immerse myself sometimes in the transits that are taking place in my chart, and then dreams come up. Dreams start talking to me, or I've done so much study, my mind is full of it, and I start meeting things in the outside world. And how the symbol, this is why I was saying it's symbol to substance.
Yes.
You get the symbol, but in astrology, that turns into the actual substance of your life. Yeah. Attitudes, events, people. The symbol is somehow that symbolic plane of reality meshes and intermingles with life, and it's a particular way of perceiving life symbolically. The Sufis call it the interworld, and where the Sufi mystics, in order to try to get to the essence of life, right, to try to get behind the veil of what we're seeing, the world of appearances, the Sufi tradition in the interworld, they see everything as a symbol. So they're looking at the essence of how that thing came into being. So if you symbolize, you're not in the objective world, you are somehow moving through.
Right. It's so fascinating. I was actually talking to somebody the other day, and I was saying that we aren't separate from what's happening in the heavens. And actually, sometimes I think of it like those little music boxes with the little metal, kind of almost like a thread in the middle that's got those little points that it plucks this little harp almost inside and plays a song. And that's how I feel like sometimes the transits and the planets kind of work. But then I thought, but how do we play into that piece of music? And I thought, well, actually, it's almost like we are the lyrics. We are the story of the song that's being played. So there's the environment in which it creates the drama, or the calm through the music, and then suddenly us down here, we are literally a sort of living story being told by the music that's being played by the spheres. That's literally the only way I can think about how it works, where we are not separate. And it's just it's interesting how it also plays into music, really, because music, I feel, is very connected in astrology. It's such a big subject, actually, and we've chosen to, rather than try and do cookbook astrology, we've tried to, we're thinking about delving into something like, what really is divination? What is it we're doing with astrology? How is it really working? You know, the subjects that we were discussing previously, weren't they, were divination, prophecy, prediction, and prognostication. So with that in mind, what do you think? I mean, what do you think of my analogy, and do you have a better one?
No, I like the analogy. It's, you know, the music of the spheres and so on, and the aspects in the chart, the mathematical relationships between planets refer to the aspects, you know, and the mathematical relationships of certain intervals on the piano. That is a very, very complicated subject in which we could we could get off topic there. But I like the analogy. Yeah, I mean, I tend to view it as the imagination's perception of patterns. So Dame Roger, for example, wonderful astrologer, a wonderful theoretician in astrology, he talked about looking at the heavens, right? Looking at all that, and scientists interpret that in terms of their facts and their measurements and accelerations and so on. But astrologers look at it and they interpret it through the language of poetry. So they've called them various names, and they see this, you see. So once upon a time, science and astrology, the scientific view, observation, and appearance on Earth was correlated. So the rising star of Sirius, right, which is was in the constellation of Cancer, when that was coming over the horizon at a particular time of year, in July, they knew that that was heralding the flooding of the Nile. And you can imagine, you know, 3,000, 2,000 years ago, actually more than 2,000, about 3,000 years ago, you can imagine that star coming, and they knew that this massive flood was coming. So astrologers, new moons, eclipses, all those kind of things, and eventually certain, that's why they were called the wandering stars, the planets, because they seem to wander, unlike the other stars which were fixed behind that. So you can imagine people trying to understand that heavenly order, what it was about. And it seemed the sun every day, well, it still rules us, doesn't it? We get up in the morning, we go, you see. And so the moon at night, in fact, there is an idea actually that Egyptian astrologers, that their signs were more connected to the moon, because they could see the moon, you see, at night. See what I mean? So anyway, the point is that the observation was then not interpreted so much as imagined. And at that time, there was a kind of very magical idea about the world, and all of these planetary spheres were thought to be in gods. That's what Plato, you know, they're perfect spheres. They are appearances of other forces behind life, and they move. And when they move over there, things happen here. And gradually, those observations came to be calendars and things. And so we were literally, over thousands of years, it actually literally impacted us. The sun, the patterns of the sun and moon literally affect our behavior. So anyway, that's how it started. But then the pattern, if you look at a pattern, and the only way to work with a pattern, really, you can work with it mathematically, but if you work with your imagination, you can see patterns connect. And if you have patterns, right, like the moon, 28 to 29 days around Saturn is 28 to 30 years, people see these patterns and they observe human patterns, and then they link them together. So there's the basis of prediction, or the basis of prognostication is the seeing of a pattern, you know?
Yes. And it must, to devise those systems, it boggles my mind, because I think about the Mayan calendar and the amount of time in which that calendar has observed the skies and can predict the end of time as we know it, apparently, you know, and that kind of thing. You know, for me to think about the amount of time that people have had to observe and to make connections on Earth. I think, was it the ancient Babylonians or something? They would stand in a watchtower and watch what was going on in the heavens and then see how it was affecting society.
Yes.
And to see that, and obviously there must be patterns that repeat. There must be rhythms. Yes. You can see it in the modern world, maybe not from a watchtower, but perhaps through fashions and through seeing how suddenly we're having an 80s revival, or you know, the music that suddenly we re-release a song, or we re-release a film. There's some kind of revisiting certain conditions that made that kind of popular, that people wanted to sit down and enjoy those things at that period in time, and now they want to relive it in a modernized way, for example. So there is, even in modern day, we can see that there are times when things repeat, and in a personal way, we can, when we're looking at the natal charts, we don't have to wait for the next one. We can look at the last one, can't we, to see what happened, and then think, well, you know, for example, Saturn transits are great, aren't they? Because, you know, you can really understand the stress of a Saturn transit through understanding that approximately at the, you know, the first opposition, you're in this country, in the UK, you're usually practicing for your GCSEs or something like that, and having a lot of pressure applied to you about, this is now the time to grow up. You know, you're going to leave school and you're going to be going out to the big wide world, where you're going to actually have to work instead of, well, unless you go to uni, college, whatever, but you know, there's this kind of time to grow up, but you're still not really a grown-up just yet. You know, it's this kind of, you have the pressure, but you don't have the true freedoms and the true reward of adulthood. That still hasn't quite arrived. And
well, that's that. So now you're amplifying a symbol. We take it from Saturn, and you know, that's how astrology works, is we take a symbol and one studies, makes that symbol a reality. So Saturn is Kronos, god of time. He's old father time, and he's also, you know, Saturn in the Roman and Kronos in the Greek. And so he was a tyrant, and he was king of heaven, and he ate his own children because he prophesied that they were going to overthrow him. So he can be a bit of a tyrant. So if you start to unfold, as you've just done, the meaning of that symbol, then it leads us into a particular element of life, which is about growing older and hopefully maturing. And maturing means the taking on of personal responsibility and authority to your own. Otherwise, Saturn is out there. Saturn is the government. Saturn is your father. Saturn is your mother. Saturn are the rules and the codes of conduct that you have to obey. It's the, you know, the dogmas. And if you don't do that, there's a kind of punishment. Very Freudian superego stuff, you see. So we can link that to a sense of internalized controls. But over time, and as you say, the Saturn transit, what happens is we are confronted with experiences which say, have you grown up yet? How much have you grown up yet? And there's always a part of us that isn't, of course. I mean, I was playing poker last night. I like to, you know, get out, mix it up, and that's my fun now. I used to, in my 40s, I used to go out dancing. There's always a bit of us that's a child, but we're talking about the adult ego, which can confront the world and hold its own against it and develop ego structures and boundaries, you see. So, well, your amplification there was about maturing in the world, and we would link that to Saturn. And as it comes round, it knocks the door, and you have to open the door, and they say, you owe us some taxes, you see, or some hard knocks of life, you know. That's how I often link Saturn with wood, you know that.
Yeah.
He's also linked in a much more positive sense. He's often given a bad press to the hermit. You know, the tarot card with the hermit. He has the staff, and that staff is made of wood. It's the knowledge of the earth, the wisdom and maturing in incarnation. We start symbolically.
Yes.
We start with a mythic figure. Then what you know about that figure, and then that figure becomes an image in your mind. And now you and I are just kind of circumambulating is, I think,
Yes.
the right ritualistic process. You go round, see. Now, the strange thing is about that is that when we see it on people's charts and you look at the Saturn position, you start talking about it, it's true.
Yeah.
My Saturn's in the 4th house. Everybody had a difficult childhood, but I was deprived of a father. There was Saturn, the 4th house rules the father. See what I mean? I learned, in fact, that I was illegitimate through Saturn, through astrology.
Wow.
It was an old aphorism in a textbook of astrology by Vivian Robson, about 1920, I think it is. And one of the things about an illegitimacy is Saturn in the 4th. Often represents a very difficult childhood, the missing father, or some kind of austerity around the home. The same as Saturn in the 3rd often represents a difficulty with the early education, or difficulty with speaking, or a shyness, or a lack of, wherever Saturn is, there's a lack. We feel a lack.
Yeah.
And that's how you learn. Because if you got everything given to you on a plate, you never actually study or discipline yourself. So anyway,
sit on your growing edge.
Yeah. So all I'm saying is it just talking about it very basically like this with you is very interesting, because I still don't know how the mystery of it. You see it in a chart, you start talking about that placement, and the person recognizes it in their own life. So this mythopoetic or mythopoeic imagination, when you start going with it, put your rationalized self aside, that tells a story.
Yes. And it can be difficult. I find it more difficult to set everything aside and be completely fresh if I know the person first, because then my mind tries to throw in ideas about what I think it could be. Whereas when I go in not knowing something or somebody, I'm not saying I can't do it. It's just that it's I don't know if it's the ego or something that just desperately wants to cling to something that it already knows. But I prefer to go in without knowing anything. So when people say to me, I want to book a reading with you, often I sort of say, unless it's a real problem solving thing, I say, I don't really need to know too much about it, just because otherwise, it's my mind gets in the way. It's a strange thing.
Yeah, I'd like to bring it also to these patterns, because the pattern is a symbol, and it places it in the 3rd house or the 4th house or the 10th house. And then we know there are 3 things. There's the sign, there's the house placement, right? Saturn in a sign, Saturn in a house, and then Saturn in relation to other aspects. And so we unfold those as we go. Generally speaking, I like to look at the essential meaning of it first. And then, but you and I know, you get into the meaning and the person says, well, that's funny. Pluto squares Saturn, ruler of your 10th or 4th, and it turned out that the father or the mother or even the grandmother died in early youth. It's like it from symbol to substance.
Yes.
The actual symbol turns into an actualized reality. And this is where we're involved in a mystery.
Yes. And it's also quite interesting how the mythology of the planet, or the story behind, if you were going to talk about Saturn or Pluto, and you can go into some of the mythological stories that are connected with that. You could, if you were struggling to actually come up with an idea of what the combination could be, you could start with, well, you know, you could talk about like the Persephone myth, for example.
Yes.
And if you even just started to explain that slightly, for example, my move to Northampton from always living most of my time in London for most of my life, it happened under a Pluto transit, and it was only in the last few years, and Pluto's not been on my son for quite a while now. I actually sort of stopped and looked around and thought, do you know what? After going on about how much I don't like it here, and I feel like I'm, you know, my whole life just was turned upside down and I don't really know what's going on, I actually think I like it. And I thought, oh, this is so Persephone. She, you know, got taken away and into the underworld, and it was kind of against her will, and her mother mourned the loss of her for you know, that time. And then when she actually re-emerged, and you know, she'd kind of lost that kind of innocence that comes with Pluto transit, she came back out and went, I actually think I'm going to go visit, because I thought it was all right. And I just thought
returns.
Yes.
This I did that course, didn't I? Worlds Beyond Ego at the beginning of the year, and Persephone is which is connected to Pluto, is in a way the forerunner to Christ's resurrection, or one of them. And there are different mythologies, and in other words, she returns, she gets abducted, she dies to an old life, and it's a forced abduction. And that's like life rapes us, doesn't it? When our innocence, when we can't have what we want, when existential reality, Saturn, hits us, it demands certain things of us, and then we realize that we're not the center of the universe as we thought. There are planets going on in us, there are energies, there are things, there are old patterns from your family moving through your genes, through your culture. We're not just our own selves. We're a kind of not a machine, but a kind of vehicle for relationships and for your daughter. And so who are we really? And so that's going on all the time. So when she gets abducted, it's her fate. Astrology of Fate is Liz Green's book, great book. And she gets abducted, and then she comes to terms with the fact of her fate. And when she does, she's allowed to return. And so she's actually the other element of Pluto, which is the resurrection after a death and transformation. And that pattern, death, transformation, rebirth, is the central symbol of that planet.
Yes. And not to make it all about myself, but I know that some of the listeners like to hear anecdotes or things that are actually real in real life, so that they can make connections themselves. There is a sense of, for myself, I am no longer that person I was before. I very much feel a very different, I'm still the same person, but there's a part of me who's completely moved forward. I've kind of evolved, really.
What part changed, Steph? What do you see? Did you see it because you took on the mantle of being a mother?
I did.
And don't you think that I mean, I've got told off for this. It's called mansplaining. I think it wasn't. But, you know, it's like a man telling a woman this. But I don't mean to. I mean to say that, did that really, you know, change you fundamentally?
Enormously. Oh, that I mean, if I had to pick a point, there's a TV show called Tribe, and there's a guy called Bruce Parry, and he takes this drug called iboga, and you know, it's basically it's like DMT, or I can't remember the other name of it now, but basically it literally creates a situation where you're forced to really honestly look at yourself. And revisit some of the darker aspects of your own personality, and the things that you've done to other people that you would pretend in your head was probably okay, but it's not. And I think that when you undergo some of the personal reflection that I have done over the past few years in my Pluto transit, the stuff that really comes at you in a way that you don't expect, really involuntarily, is when you become a mother. I can't speak for what happens when you become a father,
Yeah.
but when you become a mother, suddenly you are bombarded with memories of your own relationship with your mother. And that's only after you've settled down from the initial, as my sister describes it, a grenade being thrown into your life, and literally you're walking around, your ears ringing, and there's just smoke everywhere. And after about 4 months, you suddenly go, whoa, what just happened? And you realize you're still dealing with this complete upheaval. And yeah, I would say motherhood is, maybe because I have Saturn in the 5th house, for example, but definitely one of the biggest game changers for me. I know some people just walk into it and they just take to it like a duck to water, really natural. But for me, even though I could try and do as much preparation as I like, nothing prepared me for it.
No.
And it was an enormous transformation. And there's this thing that I'd never heard of called maitrescence, and there's adolescence, when you go through your hormonal changes as a youth, and transitioning into an adult. And then when a woman gets to a certain point, she goes through the menopause, and she has this final transition into like the crone. But actually that central transition, whether it happens in other guises, I'm not sure, but one that has not really been explained to many women who decide to become a parent, or become a parent through some form of action. They go through this period called maitrescence, where the chemical makeup, the hormones, it mimics adolescence, but we're not prepared for it. And we go through this enormous shift mentally, emotionally, physically, psychologically, and it's not something you're necessarily prepared for. I know I wasn't, and it took me a while and a bit of research to go, wow, is that what just happened?
Well, we're back to patterns, and
Yes.
not prediction exactly. We'll come on to prediction and prophecy, but around about 13, Saturn opposes its own place. So between 13 and 15, we're moving into puberty.
Yeah.
Everything hits the fan, both for men and women, and it's at that time you want to kind of the Saturn is opposing its place. So you want to separate, you want to be your own authority, but you don't have any money, and you don't really know what you're doing. You just know you want your own life, but you can't have it because you're under the authority of parents and parental roles or whatever. And very tricky time. I didn't like mine at all.
No,
so, but that repeats around about 42 to 46, 48. Now, some women have their menopause later, I understand that, but you can start to see that in the 40s there is a repeat of the adolescence or the pubertal period 30 years before, 14 years before. No, whatever it was, 30 years before. So the opposition has its so opposition 13 to 15 has its reflection at 45. So anyway, what I was trying to say about the Pluto is leading down there. That's a literal transformation.
Enormous. Yeah, absolutely. And it started, I remember not exactly the date, but I do remember the point where I decided to make the move, and it was Pluto had made a hit to my son. Already, I call it a hit, but it had already moved over properly for the first time. And I, within weeks following that, suddenly realized it would be possible for me to live alone in a flat. And I just, it's like as though something was lifted, and I was like, what's stopping me? I've never not been able to do this. And it was like a moment of empowerment that led to a huge journey of change. Literally that one thought, following, obviously, it's so much more in depth, and it's woven into this tapestry of life and everything that goes with it, and events, and everything that's steering me into a certain direction. Go on, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, because we were talking about readings before and what you might do. So if I see there are standard things about Pluto Sun, but the transits, the definition of a transit is something, you said it's a hit. I understand that, but it kind of goes, often on mine, it goes back and forth and stays there for about 2 years, sometimes 3 years. Neptune transits on my chart seem to outlast Pluto ones as well. They seem to stay on there. Something is trying to be brought out. It's trying to develop. It's a period in which whatever the transited planet is, that is what is being brought out. And so the transiting planet does it in a particular way. It's always the sun there. So this is about your vocation. It's about consciousness. It's about being an individual as opposed to just daughter of person from the past, people from the past. See? Yeah. So do you become your own sun? You become your own individual life as separated from family unit. So the move and everything that, becoming, so it's about becoming much more conscious of yourself as an individual, and there would be things in which you would have to leave behind. Things would have to go. Sometimes that's precipitated by a death in the family, sometimes literally, or sometimes it's just, well, I'm going to uproot myself.
Yeah, I would say
from
that
one soil into another.
Yeah, and for people who might be concerned, it wasn't death that caused this major upheaval for me. And Pluto doesn't, even though we associate it with death, it doesn't mean it's definitely going to mean that for everybody, and it was more of a death of the person I thought I was, very much awakening to that, really.
So I do want to come back to this thing about prediction of what they call prediction of particulars and divination, because I've spent in that Symbol to Substance, that little booklet, there's a kind of mini biography of my astrological journey. And when I first started out, I was looking for the definitive interpretation system. How do you interpret this? And a lot of the old books, it was talking about external things, you're going to have some fortune over there, or you're going to marry this and so on. They're very much Indian astrology is about that. It's the prediction, so-called prediction of having children, moving, buying houses. It's as if your life is seen in your events in life and nothing's going on in here. But with the advent of psychological astrology, there was the personal journey, a sense of personal growth. And so Stephen Arroyo, Noel Till, this greenhouse support us. Frank was in that wave too, humanistic astrology, trying to use astrology as an astrology of motivation, that all of the planets motivate us. Mars motivates us like this, and Saturn teaches us this, and so on. So the prediction systems that I've used relate to psychotherapy, relate to Jung, relate to all of that. So that's a very good use of interpreting from symbol to the substance of meaning, right? That's why it was called that.
Yes, yeah. I just want to let people know that I had a few Vedic people predict stuff for me, by the way, that was quite, I always find it quite fatalistic. It's like there's no real choice.
Yeah, well,
and none of the stuff that they said actually happened, so
no,
it's fine.
But you see again this idea, prediction. Anyway, I just want to complete that thought. So I did a lot of that interpretation stuff. So I have a pool, if you like, and of interpretive lines and things that I can. But eventually, I've come to realize that what I do, and I think what all astrologers do, and this is where the work of Geoffrey Cornelius and the company Astrologers comes in, is we are actually diviners. You look at a symbol, and for me now, that symbol triggers something off. And it could be an psychological interpretation, or I might get a vision, or I might get an idea or an intuitive stuff. You see me do it in classes, and sometimes there are hits, right? Yeah. Oh, there's that. Yes, I did have an accident yesterday. I did fall down. Yes, but why? You see, so the divinatory aspect is to call upon the gods for inspiration, and you do that through the medium of the symbol.
Yes.
You see, so if you were in ancient Rome, the ogres and the seers of ancient Rome were called upon to answer questions for the state. They were paid, and they had trainings, and they would enter the Ogarium, it was called, the ogres, the flights of birds. So they would enter that from the western gate facing east, and there was all the ritual paraphernalia and everything else. And then the ogre might stay there and then see birds. Did the birds come from the north? Did they come from the east? Did they come from the south? Did they go past? Which way did they go past? All of these different things were signs. But the state of mind was, like us astrologers, we're in a symbolic frame of mind, aren't we? Yeah. We've shifted from our rational state, and we're perceiving the world in a different way. And something would happen over the field of consciousness, and you could read the flight of birds. That's what sometimes it might be a crow, or sometimes it might be you see, and all of these different things had different meanings. And it would hit the diviner in their state and their preparations and their purifications and their evocatory rituals and all of that. They've gone through all that, and they're in a state. And that's, by the way, what my book about horary astrology is about. It's about getting into that divinatory state of mind, which astrologers do when they look at a symbol. Now, if they do it with the mind only, you might as well just read it in a book, rather like we first did, you and I, when we read tarot, right? You get tarot, what does it mean? You look up the meaning, and it's in position 4. So this is the root of the matter. But eventually, you make a rapport, psychic, mental, imaginal, all of your studies, they're all there. None of it is wasted. Yeah. And then you come to that symbol, Saturn transit, this placement, that placement, and we hope you're calling upon, that is called a bidden omen. It's like you're asking something inside you to read that symbol for the person at that moment in time. Now that's divination. Yes. Or you can have certain set ideas about it, interpretation systems, whether it's Liz Green or Howard Suspaltus or whatever it is, and you can use those because they're very good too. But that's translation. Saturn in the 4th house, missing father, blah blah. That's translating. Do you understand? There's a slight difference. Yes. Yeah. Divination is what is it telling me now. And that's a more mysterious esoteric process, because the person in front of you will be influencing you. And that influence is a kind of mix. Sometimes I used to do readings without anyone. I used to do them on tape, just to trust my intuition. And I would just see and things, and maybe I'd have a picture of them or something, psychic readings kind of thing, and allow that to develop. So I've come full circle from my magical roots into the psychological, and then I'm coming back in horary astrology to the divination of the symbol. And that could be an interpretation of the symbol for that moment. You know how we do. You've probably done sun sign readings for people on trains. I did one of those many years ago. Would you like to hear the story? I was doing a class on horary astrology at the LSA, London School of Astrology. I was going in, and I was looking at a chart, and I saw Jupiter in Gemini in the 12th house. It was there, and I was concentrating on it. So I wonder what that was. And there were 2 people sitting by me, and they were both having drinks. One was a very large man, and him and his partner were not his sexual partner, but his business partner. And he said, "Oh, what are you doing there? What are you doing there?" And I said, "Oh, I'm an astrologer." I said, "Well, what's my sun sign?" then. And he was a bit drunk, and he said, "Oh, well, what's mine?" And I said, "You're a Gemini and you're a Sagittarius." Looking at the Jupiter symbol, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And he couldn't believe it because he was a Gemini.
I love it when that happens.
Right? So,
yeah.
All right, but then I gave him a little reading, and that Gemini was at 15 degrees of Gemini, right? So I read that as a halfway through the sign. I said, 6 months ago, you changed your life in some way, and you've got about 5 or 6 months left in order to make it happen. They nearly fell off their chairs. What they had done is they'd left their previous posts and they joined together. And I've got the card up there, and you're never going to believe this. The new partnership was called the Affinity Partnership. Affinity, which is a very Geminian word.
Yeah.
Affinities mean likenesses. So, and he said, "Will I be successful?" And I said, "Well, that depends on the..." See, so I didn't predict, but there was that. So that symbol that I was concentrating, and there was this big, plump Jupiterian guy.
Yeah.
He was drunk.
Yeah.
That's the Pisces side of yeah.
That was the clue.
Right, but there's this, and we know that Jupiter represents expansion, big largesse, volume, fat, gloating, bloating, all of those kind of things that balloon out. And he was doing this, and that was a moment of astrology.
Yes.
And because I was teaching horary at the time, I was in that, and so I just did that reading, and there was the real moment of astrology come to life. Now, you can't teach that in any book. It was in the moment. I went with the symbol. It related to him. They gave me their card, and I don't know whether they were successful. And remember, that Jupiter was in the 12th house of this horary that I was looking at. So this is all very kind of mysterious. Something's happening weird.
And people have an idea of what you can do with astrology, and they're really shocked when you show them what you can actually do.
Yeah.
Like, they think that they know what it is when they're coming in from like sun sign things in the newspaper, and they just think, "Oh, well, go on then, tell me this, tell me that." But it's just such a huge thing. You can do that basic stuff, but it's so much deeper than that. But just on the subject of that exact sort of anecdote, I think I was in a class with you. I've been in a couple of classes with you, actually. And one of them was you were running through the sun signs, but I can't remember what it was that we were talking about. But as you got to Cancer, or just at the end of what was it, Gemini, this girl burst into the class and said, "Sorry, I'm late." And then you went, "Are you Cancerian?" And she said, "Yes, why? Are they notoriously late?" And you said, "No, it's just that you're next." And she sort of went, "Oh, right. Oh, okay then." But it was just, I think it was like a trial class or something where people could come along and see a taster.
Yeah.
But it was just so funny because people turn up when they're meant to. And I think there was another one where somebody walked into the class just as, because you can tell a lot by somebody by their demeanor and things like that. They literally physically represent things sometimes, don't they? And I remember somebody walking into the class and the door sort of slammed behind them, and the way that they kind of burst in, you said something like, I think that you said something about them having like a strong Uranus or something in their chart, and they said, "Yes, I do." And it's just that they come in and they symbolize that thing, and you can use that as an example to educate people, because it's about waking up to being very conscious in the moment and being able to almost tune into a different frequency.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. That you could call the appearance of the symbol in substance, you see. So again, if we come back to that, the theme of that booklet was how a symbol appears. And sometimes when you're in that mode, you can see symbolically. So you're slightly shifting your focus of awareness. So there was another class, I remember I was talking about the sun and Leo, and we were talking about all kinds of things. I was talking about the correspondences of the sun being oranges, because it looks like the sun. And then this woman did come in, and she came in, and I said, "What have we got in there?" And she was a Leo, and she had a load of oranges. The other thing was, I was demonstrating how to read other people from the chart, and there was one at the back, and it was a brother. All right, so you looked at the third house, and I was just trying to demonstrate signification, and the Saturn was opposed something, and I described the brother, what they did. He was abroad. He was just about to get married because that Pluto did, and I was just in that kind of frame where the symbols were speaking.
Yeah.
All right. In other words, going along with it.
Yes.
But I think this is important because sometimes they do predict, they do show, but I don't think that's from the astrology. That's from the astrologer and the moment. There's the difference. You can't predict by technique. You can have techniques of prediction, but the often prediction or some hit or something arrives in the moment.
Yeah.
When you're doing your astrology, because you're in a slightly altered state.
Yes. Yeah.
The
altered state.
I did a reading 6 months ago for this woman in Portugal, and she had Jupiter in the 7th in Leo, and it was the ruler of the 11th. So we know that's friends. The 7th house is other people, Jupiter in Leo. And I said right at the end of the reading, do you have a friend who is taller than you with blonde hair and you're going to see her soon? And she said, yes, she's coming tonight. Now, you and I know, friend, ruler of the 11th, Jupiter, tall, Leo, blonde. But why I said it at that particular time, I don't know.
Yes.
And I think that does happen sometimes because maybe the person needed, you can believe in your astrology. I've often seen those psychic things come in when the person needs a jolt.
Yes. Yeah. It's like a moment of, this isn't a load of rubbish, and
that's
there's
right.
something you need to look out for. It's just like it comes along and just says, you can sit here and you can just enjoy the conversation and love listening to them talk about you and give you all of this stuff about yourself and personality traits, but there's a meaning behind this. There's something deeper, and just look out for this one detail, and this should give you the confirmation, or there's something you need to learn.
I think those psychic things in readings, sometimes they happen more often than not. Sometimes they don't happen at all. But it's not the astrology. And that's where we have to get off the prediction. The prediction, if you use any symbolic language, including tarot and all that, you can, sometimes you're in that zone and things happen, but it isn't the astrology.
Yeah.
There's the Centiloquium, Claudius Ptolemy in his Tetrabiblos. At the back is called the 100 Rules Aphorisms of Centiloquy, and they're aphorisms of ancient astrologers. And there's 100 of them. They're pretty good.
Yeah.
Very, very useful. I must have thousands of aphorisms that I've read over the years inside somewhere. And the first one, it talks about prediction. And it said astrologers don't predict. That you must always have a sense of inference or reference. And this is Tetrabiblos. This is 2nd century, first, Ptolemy set up the whole range of planetary rulerships, sign rulerships, aspects, right? He was the one we've got to thank for our Western astrology. And in that, he said, we don't predict, you just must infer. And I think the last line says something like, those who predict particulars, in other words, definite things, are those inspired by deity. Inspired by something else, inspired by a divinity, inspired by the moment. Do you see what I mean?
There's something very, you talking about the altered state and that kind of connection that you get, like, and I think that for some people it's looking at tarot cards, for other people it's looking
Yeah,
at a chart, some people reading the birds in the sky,
yeah,
under whether you have to get into a certain meditative state,
yeah,
or how you reach that kind of point.
yes,
But there is some kind of doorway that opens when you're there. It's not always, even, it doesn't have to happen every single time, but sometimes you can have moments where information is literally handed to you in some way, like as an image or words. Like, for example, I remember looking at a chart for somebody I was going to go and do a reading for in person
yeah,
years ago now. And as I looked at just part of her natal chart, not transits or anything, but just part of her natal chart, I
yeah.
think it was like Venus, Uranus in Scorpio, I heard a shock of white hair. And as I walked into the place that I met her, she was standing there and her hair was completely white,
Mm,
very different to the last time I'd seen her. And I just thought, why did I get that? Like, how
yeah,
on earth do you get this stuff? Like, I don't know where that came from. But these things do just appear sometimes, or
mm,
sometimes it's imagery. Like, I'd be not even looking at anything in the chart, but I would be deep in the
yes,
state of reading the chart, and I would suddenly be seeing imagery like a
yes,
cinema screen in my head,
right.
and
So,
it's like, what is that?
well, there we have the beginnings of divination
Mm,
rather than a reading.
yes.
You see, but it's interesting what that word, the reading the omens, reading the signs.
Mm,
Every time a person does a reading, or you go and look at your ephemeris, that's a different moment, and something is going to be triggered off in relation to the symbol. But you can do it theoretically. You can look at interpretations. I still, read my arroyos and all that, or house the sporters, 12 houses, and the planets in the houses, and it gives me a starting point.
yeah.
Yes, but that's all interpretive technique.
Yeah.
Planet in a sign. A planet is a motivational need, if you like, in psychological terms. It
Yes.
wants it's part of the pantheon of gods, and they have their needs, and they sing through you, as you said at the beginning.
Yes.
They pluck a string, and Venus has her string, and
Yes.
you know what I mean. She
Yeah.
has her song, and she wants to make you go and have pleasure in life and enjoyment,
Yeah.
and eat good things, and look at beautiful people, and poetry and art and good design. Venus is very much
Mm,
connected to design and architecture too, in Libra.
mm,
See, it's not just physical sensation and pleasure. And she plucks her strings, and that's that. So they need fulfillment. And in the sign, the way that planet is going to be obtain what it wants, it's going to be through the sign. So the sign tells us how the planet appears, and the house tells us how we actualize that in actual life. In other words, different kinds of experiences, how we're going to meet that. So those are the three things: planet, sign, house, and then you link them together, and then the other things, and that you start to build up an interpretation of that. But in anyone reading, you may get an inspiration from it, which is more
mm.
divinatory rather than interpretive. That's what we do in
Yes.
horary.
I mean, what is inspiration? Where does that come from? It's often the thing that I find the most interesting, to try and analyze, because it's almost not yours. Where did it even come from?
Well, inspiration is in the Greeks, they have the 9 muses. One of the muses is Urania, who's the astrology. So
Mm,
that's a difficult thing, because I think it all mixes in with psychic elements,
mm,
clairvoyance, empathy, or clairsentience. I'm a clairsentient, so what people feel, I feel. I have my Mercury in Cancer, and if I feel that and I take it on, rather like a medium, so you take it on, that will tell you bits of information about the person,
mm,
or there might be a direct mind transference. I used to study a lot about body language, so people that the face they're doing this, or the tone of voice, it all means something. It's coming out from someone. So I think that all influences things. The other thing is, if you're doing just a bear reading without anybody, the essence of that person is in the chart. So maybe that essence anyway is in the etheric field, if you like. So don't want to get too hokey pokey, but there are there are things I think that go on. And if you're a medium, or if you're an astrologer, or if you're a tarot reader, you may have a message for that person. And
I wonder though,
something uses you.
Yes, but I don't know necessarily whether, for people who are listening or watching and thinking, well, I don't think I am a medium and I'm not a psychic, by practicing astrology, by practicing tarot or any of those kind of crafts that you're drawn to,
yes,
it's about training, I personally think, training your mind to allow itself to go into a state which is separate from the one that we're perhaps taught in school, you know, like the kind of the very academic way of seeing the world. It's almost like unlearning that style. I mean, you can do it through an academic way, you know. Lots of people are academic about astrology. I'm not. But there's a way of tuning in to that altered state and understanding that there are no coincidences. You know, you find yourself on that train, on that date, at that time, next to those people who just so happen to want to test you. And you know, you were on your way to teach horary, and I wonder if it was the class that I was sitting in, where we were all talking in a group, and suddenly in the middle of this process of talking, and we were all really involved, you suddenly stopped and went, now everybody just stop. And we all sat back a bit jolted out of it, and you said, what are we doing right now? And we all looked at each other and thought, wow, we got into some sort of like mass cloud of something. And it's like being able to switch. But I don't think that it means that just because you don't naturally see this about yourself, these skills, that you can't do it. Because I think that when you join a school, or if you start getting into these practices and you go to groups, or even if you're a solo practitioner, you can learn how to do this, can't you?
Well, yes. And in fact, that is the whole basis. Horary astrology really is we ought to say, is divinatory astrology. It has its techniques, it has its well-worn techniques, and you follow that, you train in those techniques. But after a while, you're training your mind to see into the symbol. And that's what my book is about. It's called the Horary Process, and it's a process of entering into an astrological chart with your mind. Yes, you follow it, but it's also to get you into a certain kind of state. And we may go in and out of that state. Every time you look at a symbol, we go in and out of that state, just briefly, and then you say something, and then it tells you something else, and then it's so yes, I believe astrology is a training in a symbol system. It's obvious. And
your book, you need to tell us a bit more about it, because when you told me you're publishing a book on horary, I've been to many of your classes.
Frank Clifford is publishing it.
Well, you're the one that it's your knowledge and experience in words that are going into that publication. You've written, haven't you?
Sorry.
Yes.
Yeah.
But no, it's exciting, because I am fortunate enough to have been to quite a few of your classes. I've heard about your meticulous approach to learning about the symbols and the signs, and putting it into practice, like that one that you couldn't solve for ages, and you for months maybe even had the chart, and you kept asking yourself the question, and then looked at the bookcase and found that it was the middle shelf down. It was something like, I remember you talking about a particular issue, and I just thought the patience and the determination that you have to study to the extent that you have, to have the depth of knowledge, and the fact that somebody could have that knowledge in their hand in the form of a book and literally explore your process is so exciting. I can't wait for it to come out, and I want you to tell me more about it.
Well, Frank, fortunately for me, he offered a few months ago to write it with me. his ability to teach all, you know, from beginner students to advanced students is much better than mine. He has a greater capacity to for education. He's written so many books. He's very clear, mood in Virgo, and Aries. He does loads and loads and loads of them, and he teaches. He teaches across the world, so he has a lot more experience than I do of teaching classes. I've taught a lot of classes, but so he's going to help clarify it. He's going to put in some charts, which explain things clear. So I cannot tell you the relief. So we're writing it together, although the main bulk of the horary process is about that. It's about training your mind to move into the astrological chart so it speaks to you. Pure divination. Following a technique. The technique is a fivefold process, rather like a ritual. And I've explained it, that moving into an horary chart to try and ask a question is like a ritual. And there's an interesting thing about it. I mean, when you do an horary chart, the astrologer is always on the 7th house cusp. So the astrologer and there's the querent, the ascendant, and there's the astrologer, and they meet. So I'm the 7th, and the querent is the 1st. Even if you're your own astrologer, you're divided. You're an astrologer, and you're the person asking the question. That's
so interesting,
right? But think about it: that the western point of the chart over here, that's where the astrologer comes in. Those are where the diviner priests used to come in the Ogarium. From the west, facing east, and the eastern point of the chart, the ascendant, is where the question is. See, that's where the question comes. That's where the sun comes up, isn't it? So anyway, I'm just trying to give let's say, a mental framework, a magical framework, to enter into the whole process of horary. And if you frame it like that, first of all, then that's a help to get into the chart. It's a magical approach. Now, that's what it's called, a magical approach to an ancient art.
And have you adapted techniques and sort of modernized them in your own way, or adapted them in some ways so that they're your own style, or are you drawing from very traditional techniques?
The main original element of this is the framework.
Yeah.
And the method of procedure. So you use that method of procedure to get into the chart, and you focus on it and everything else. And so, you know, every horary chart is a new experiment. So I still get my William Liddy book down, you know, the one up there, the Christian Astrology. It's got 1001 pages or whatever it is. And I learn, you see, so I go through it. So you go through the terms of the planets and the essential dignities, and you have to ask yourself, what does a mutual reception mean? How am I going to interpret that? When you see Saturn in Libra and you say it's exalted, what does that mean?
Yeah.
What does exalted mean? So you have to, what does a dispositor of a planet mean? What does being well disposed towards something? They're not in aspect, but they are linked. So Saturn in Libra, its dispositor is Venus. And where that Venus sign is, so the Saturn and Venus. Now, what if they're in mutual reception? What if Venus is in Capricorn and Saturn is in Libra? They have a mutual sign, see? So what the gist of it is to really think through these terms. What does a planet in a house mean?
Yeah.
And do you see, to really think through them like that. Now, I've used, obviously, the well-worn techniques of horary astrology, and there are a lot of them.
Yes.
Translations of light, perfection, and it all has its own beautiful language, rephrenation, peregrination, hindrance, frustration, you know, impedition. It's got all of its beautiful language, and, you know, void of course moon. And you get this lovely set of language, which can then be applied in a practical situation. And So I think the original part of it isn't so much the techniques, although I am a keen advocate of using the natal chart, because the natal chart often turns up in the horary.
Yeah.
For example, I predicted in 2016, I didn't do it very well, but I did predict that Trump would win the election in 2016. And I delivered that chart at the Astrological Conference, Great Britain, and everybody thought I was cuckoo.
It's funny how people project their wants and desires onto a situation when they're reading a chart. It can happen, can't it? It's
let me just
I could see that he was going to win as well. Yeah.
Yeah, but well, I'm sure other people could see, but the
Yeah.
chart, and I'm in the book, I've produced the chart and my thought
excellent.
process, and
I can't wait to see that.
And what I learned about doing that chart. But there's a very interesting thing about that. You see, that the Jupiter was at 24 Virgo, which is the exact point of my ascendant. And the Gemini, 22 degrees, Gemini is on the cusp of the 7th house, the astrologer. That's my MC. Exactly.
So interesting.
So that chart, and anyway, I go through it. It's a bit complicated, but I thought this chart was telling me something.
Yeah, definitely.
And in fact, it told me the difference between prognostication, prediction, divination, and so on. And it was that chart that got me into the differences, what divination really is. It isn't just predicting your future. It is almost like the Tao of the moment. You see it and you can move along with it. So you have choice, not always in life, but there are moments where what you do, your conduct, how you are, how you align yourself with the planets, with the will of heaven, as William Lilly would say, which is the energies. You could say it's the Tao of the moment. You know, so astrology is a way of aligning ourselves with a greater will. And if we align ourselves more correctly, then we may be able to steer a little bit. So that square that's coming along isn't just a no, it's an obstacle. How are we going to approach that obstacle? What is the nature of that obstacle? If you act unconsciously in relation to it, you haven't got a chance. But if you could see it coming, then you might be able to approach it differently. So future aspects relate to the future, and they tell us how we are going to align ourselves to try and get the outcome that we want. And if we can't get the outcome because the astrology says, well, what, you were not supposed to have it. You're not supposed to find that lost object. You're not supposed to get married. Sorry, you're not supposed to get that house. And that's all there is to it, because the astrology is saying no, but it's saying no for particular reasons. So horary in many ways is a way of aligning yourself. A question is something out of place. It's something you don't know. It's worrying. Comes out, and the astrologer puts it back and says, okay. You see, and maybe that's the original part of the book too. It's something about aligning yourselves correctly rather than just predicting yes or no.
Yes. Yeah, it's
Am I waffling on here, or
no, because you're inspiring my thought process again, Richard. I was just thinking about how magically the question can arise, and you were talking about how the seers, or was it the seers or the ogres or something,
ogres,
would
seers,
be
ogres,
facing the east and watching the rising sun, or the direction of the rising sun, and this is where things arise. It's that kind of magic in the literal visualization of what something arising could be. It's just that kind of thing. And it's the thought process that you inspire within me. But that really, horary astrology is astrology coming to life, isn't it? And it's tuning in, perhaps not necessarily straight away. It takes a bit of practice, but it's tuning into the living moment almost. I mean, now when I have people coming and asking me questions, I can cast a chart, whether it's whether they've got a birth chart or not, they can have a reading. That's the beauty of horary. You don't have to have a birth time. You don't have to have anything. You just have to know what you want to ask and decide what that question means at that moment, and then cast a chart for it. And that means it's inclusive. Anybody can do it. Anybody can receive that kind of reading. And that is an amazing thing as well, because it's
Yeah.
there are plenty of people in the world that are unsure of the time they were born, and some even the date. I know someone that wasn't even sure what year they were born. It's
You know,
it's
yeah, but those kind of things, I got to see that you work with the limitations that you're given.
mm-hmm.
And
Yeah,
sometimes some of my best readings have been on trains with sun signs,
yeah. It's
because
amazing.
because you just focused on that. Or if they say they're born in 1961, I know the roughly where
Yeah,
the planets are, you see. So, or they're born, see, I can remember charts now. I look at a chart once, I know where all the placements are. I've got that kind of, I've been
yeah,
seeing him so long, I could,
yeah,
you see it, just look at it and I know.
yeah.
But I also know certain transits when they were occurring in my own chart, so you can
Exactly.
approximate.
Yeah.
So something, even if you've just got a sun sign, right, with a degree or roughly, yeah,
Mm,
see? I can remember when Pluto was at 15 uh, uh, Sagittarius, opposed it, right? So if you know that, you can say, well, in, you know, 2003, and you say, and they go, where'd you
yeah.
get that? It's
Yeah.
like you can do a lot with
Yes.
just one placement.
Yes, exactly.
And
Exactly.
that's in the moment. So I always work with the limitations that you're given. So if a person has a birth date and they don't know anything, I'll just do a flat chart. I'll put the sun at the ascendant and do a solar chart. That, for me,
Yes.
that works best.
Yes, and I like to do a combination of things. I'm all about the variety, says Miss Gemini rising, but I like to, particularly in certain situations, just casting a chart of the moment can give you so much information and really give you
Yeah,
some straight answers as well. So it's exciting for anybody listening or watching, because we haven't gone into great depth about horary on this podcast before. And I feel like we may have to have you back to discuss the subject as
yeah,
a show all by itself and maybe look at a couple of charts.
yeah.
But it's been really interesting exploring the magic that occurs, which allows astrology, or
Yeah.
the divination process allows this moment to happen, for
I've
things
just
to
thought,
arise.
can I just I know we're winding down now, but can I just share my screen? Okay. I know we weren't going to do this particular, but another time we could
That's
do
fine.
charts and so on. But what do you see here?
Mm. I can see the waves crashing up against that dam. Is it? Is it a dam or
Yes.
a divider? But the face in the waves. There's a
Isn't
face.
that Neptune?
Yes. Yeah.
Well,
I
with the
love it.
beard and the sun, he's appeared
Mm.
in that crashing wave, and then maybe even a hand here or something. And there's a little
Yeah.
seagull, interesting enough, coming in there. But this was a picture taken at New Haven some time ago, and I'm grateful to Jeffrey Cornelius for this because he introduced me to this. And I
Yes.
think it's so clear that he's made an appearance, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Enormously.
It's so sad. But let's have a little look at the chart of that moment.
Okay.
This was a lecture I delivered some time ago. Here's the chart: Neptune at the harbour wall in New Haven. Look at
Yes.
Neptune over here, god of the sea,
Yes. Yeah.
making an appearance to the public. It was shocked to see. But look at this old tricky Mercury. It's exactly square to Neptune.
Yeah.
And Mercury is, and especially Gemini, is the god of highways and byways, two pathways.
Yes.
He's called a psychopomp. He can go into the underworld. He can move around in the world of imagery and symbol and then translate that into rational interpretation. So this Mercury here is a very tricky person. They like to go all over the place with words, with images and everything else. But
Mm.
look at the exact square, apart from
Yeah.
3 minutes of arc.
Yeah. It's incredible, isn't it?
It is. And of course the moon here is the MC, the god of the waves and so on. But I just thought that's an interesting thing. So let's just go back there. There he is. I
Yeah.
think that's a great picture. Whoever took it, it's great.
Yeah. It's brilliant. Yeah. Yeah. It's and I love things like that. I love things like that. And it goes to show you that there are just moments that really tie in to astrological happenings that
Yes.
are so literal, that it's hard to ignore them. But if you don't read the astrology, you can't always make that connection. You can maybe connect with it on a level, recognizing it, seeing it, and going into your own process and understanding it in your own way. But actually, when you see it written down in astrological language as of that moment, that's when it really amazes me, because I think, well, that's just strange. That's even stranger.
Yes.
I mean, weird enough to see Neptune there, but then to also realize that he's actually directly communicating.
Yes,
it's amazing.
exactly. And he's come up through the waves just to put in a little appearance for us with that exact Mercury square. And so here we are in a discussion, and that symbolism is coming through. We've talked about magic today. We've talked about the seventh house today. We've talked about Pisces. We've talked about symbols and, rationality. And those are often at square, Pisces and Gemini. Gemini like to word things and communicate, but Pisces just like to keep it a little bit nebulous. Always quite a little bit on the fence, but it's very magical as Neptune, because it moves in that realm of imagination, that realm of magic, and half the twilight world of the known, the unknown, psychic imagery, all of the stuff we've talked about today.
Yes, it's fascinating stuff. So remind me, it's From Symbol to Substance, one of your books.
It's a small booklet.
And your next book that will be hitting the press at some point soon.
Yes, we hope to do it to the end of the year. Yes, somewhere there. The Horary Process.
Yes.
A magical approach to an ancient art.
And you're seeing clients at the moment?
I am seeing clients at the moment, yes. And I'm a professional astrologer, so you get a wave of clients, and then there might be a trickle, and then another wave.
How Neptunian.
Neptunian.
How will people get in touch with you if they want to have a reading?
Well, would it be possible to put them to contact you, and then you could send them my number?
I can always forward people on to you. That's absolutely fine. Let me know if you're interested in seeing
I
Richard.
haven't got a website yet, and I've been very lax, and I should, and but I hope that will be coming sometime soon too, but one can only do so much.
If you'd like to be in with a chance of winning a gorgeous Monk's Astrology personalized birth chart or birth chart clock, all you have to do is subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you have a private channel, screenshot your subscription and email it. And if you just include your YouTube handle as well, so tell me what your channel's called, just so that if for whatever reason, I do pull your name out the hat, I can hunt you down in a few different ways to let you know you won this beautiful clock made by the very talented Catherine Monks, who creates a variety of bespoke and personalized astrological ornamental artwork, and it really is truly stunning, with Austrian crystals. It's such a beautiful little gift, or just something to have around your home. I have a clock for myself, and it really is a beautiful thing. Well, it's been really wonderful talking to you, Richard, and like I said, you're constantly inspiring my thought process. I'd want to talk about so many different things. There's so much stuff I didn't say because I just knew we'd go off on tangents. So we do need to have another conversation soon.
Well, let's do that. Let's do that.
I'd love to do that.
Maybe it'll be a little more focused next time, but this is the first time we've done this, so I found it enjoyable, very enjoyable.
Hopefully it won't be too long before you come back, and we'll have lots more exciting stuff to talk about. Thanks very much, Richard.
Thank you. Bye.